and my name is Kate.
And I'm Becca.
And we are here from a charity called Sutton Schoolswork. You might be familiar with us because we work in secondary schools all around Sutton, and usually we would be with you in your classrooms, but unfortunately due to these times that we're in at the moment, that can't be the case. But we hope you're going to enjoy this workshop just as much as you would have done if we were with you in person.
So we're going to be talking a little bit about a topic that's actually debated quite a lot, and that is the topic of science and faith. So let's get stuck in. We want this lesson to be as engaging and interactive as possible, and part of us doing that is going to give you plenty of time to discuss and reflect on what you think about these different topics. To help us along with that, you guys should have a worksheet in front of you. If you don't have it, you can find it at the link in our description. As we go through, we'll have times to pause and for you to answer these questions and make notes. So make sure you've got a pen at hand so you can do that. To get us started, the topic of science and the topic of faith are massive. So let's set some definitions in place to help us understand what we're specifically talking about today. As Kate said, Sutton Schoolswork is a Christian charity, so when we talk about faith throughout this lesson, we'll be specifically thinking about the Christian faith. Secondly, science is a massive topic as well, and so throughout this lesson we're specifically talking about the natural sciences. So think biology, chemistry, physics, that kind of thing. So let's get started. Here's a question for you to have a think about. Do you think that science and faith are things that conflict? And if you do, what specific areas of science do you think might conflict with the Christian faith? Pause the video and answer that question now.
Okay, so we hope you enjoyed those discussions and you were able to answer those questions for yourselves. And it's amazing that you've all got completely different opinions, and that is absolutely okay. And maybe just to recap some of those areas of conflict that you were thinking about. Maybe it was something to do with the Big Bang Theory or evolution, and we're actually going to touch on those a little bit more later on in this session. So for me personally as a Christian, it's actually really reassuring to know that there are loads of scientists out there that are committed Christians. They have a faith. And here are just a few examples. But for now we are going to concentrate on just a few of them. Okay, so the first one that we're going to concentrate on is a guy called Francis Collins, and he looks like this. And he was born in 1950, and he is the director of the Human Genome Project, which is all about genes. It's kind of a clue in the name. And he is actually a committed Christian. I wonder how many of you maybe recognise him as a name, or the work that he's done, or the fact that he was actually a Christian. Okay, next we've got a guy called Professor Bill Phillips. And this guy is pretty amazing because he won a Nobel Prize for laser cooling in 1997, which is a pretty big deal. And he also was a Christian woman. We've got Jennifer Wiseman, and she was the senior project scientist for the Hubble Space Telescope. And she was also a Christian. So it shows that all these scientists, they can do some amazing work and they find some truly amazing things in the whole world of science, yet they still have that Christian faith that they hold on.
So what do Christians believe about how the world came into being? To put it simply, Christians believe that God created. So it's called creationism. It kind of comes in the name, doesn't it? God created. And the account of how God created and what happened can be found at the start of the Bible in a book called Genesis. There are different ways that Christians might interpret this passage and therefore understand how creation happened. But actually, we're going to explore those three different strands throughout the rest of this lesson to hopefully give you a deeper understanding that actually Christians believe a variety of different things, but centrally still that God created. As we walk through these 3 different perspectives, I really encourage you to put on 3 different hats. Really just pause and think about why people might believe this, even if it's different from what you believe yourself. This will help you to have a greater understanding and a greater depth of knowledge on the topics, rather than just writing them off because they're different from what you think. But before we get into that, why not check out the video that's linked in the description below. It's a professor called Dr. Stuart Burgess, and he's sharing how his faith complements his understanding of science.
Okay, so now we're going to spend some time explaining some different perspectives Christians might have about science and faith and basically the world and creation. And in between each one, we want you to have a think, and we'll put a little pause video during this, so don't worry about that. And we'll just ask you to write a summary of what that person has just spoken about.
So a young earth view of reading Genesis chapter 1 takes a text literally. God is omnipotent, and this means he's all powerful. So regardless of what some science might say about how long rock formations might take, how long it takes for a star to explode or implode, actually that doesn't change a young earth's view. God can do what he likes. He works outside of time, and he can work in and outside of space. So when we read Genesis 1, we can read it in confidence that this is how God did things. We know that God says that he's honest, that what he says is truth. So surely when we read Genesis 1, that should line up with what really happened. Science doesn't necessarily conflict with what a young earth person believes, because their understanding of God goes beyond what the science says. Science is a human way of understanding the world, but God is bigger than that.
How do I see Genesis fitting in with my concept of science? Well, I think the scientific evidence is always important to take on board. And I find the scientific evidence for an old Earth overwhelmingly compelling. But that doesn't mean I've got to now try and shoehorn the scientific evidence into what Genesis says, or shoehorn Genesis into the scientific evidence. They can sit side by side, because I see them as 2 different interpretations of the same event. I've got the scientists telling me this is the facts of what happened, great. But I've got Genesis telling me why and who and what was the purpose and the outcome. So I see Earth as being an old Earth because science tells me, but I see it as being made by my God because the Bible tells me. When it says that it took 6 days, my response is, yeah, but that's fairly poetic. That's how I'm supposed to see the order in which, because he was therefore in control. I don't think I'm being forced to believe it took him 24 hours and then another 24. I don't see that as scientific. I see it as more of a kind of poem in a way, because God needed to tell me, like he needed to tell the astrophysicist, and he needed to tell the shepherd. This is how I made it. And all of us needed to be able to understand it in terms of how it's fitted into how we saw the world around us. So I don't see science as denying my faith. I see science as giving me another interpretation of my same faith. My brother, actually, on the other hand, who is a Christian, he firmly believes in a young Earth. He actually discounts a lot of the science, and I find him trying to shoehorn some science into his faith. And I see a conflict. I don't see the point. See, I would see Genesis, I don't need to understand Genesis in terms of what happened. I need to understand who was behind it. And I think Genesis tells me that. But I think he just wanted me to say, I was in control, and I did it. Let's move on from that point, shall we? And the scientists say, oh yes, but you need to know how. And I go, I don't really need to know how. But I know it happened. and I see the two of them flowing side by side in harmony. There'll be some times when the scientists might say, oh yes, but we've proved this. And sometimes Genesists say, oh yeah, but I've proved this. And I say, well, no, nobody's proved anything because I wasn't there. And to be honest, I just want to know why he did it. And I think the answer to that is found elsewhere. And that's how I see how science and faith live side by side.
So the third and final viewpoint that some Christians might have when it comes to thinking about Genesis and creation is theistic evolution. Now, this basically means that those that have this viewpoint would say that Genesis is just seen as poetry. It's a song. It's a song written to God as our creator of the universe.
So we've just explored three quite different understandings of Genesis chapter 1 and how different Christians might interpret that passage. So what does this look like in practice? For instance, some of you might have said that the Big Bang Theory might conflict with many Christian beliefs. And actually, let's see how different perspectives on Genesis chapter 1 might inform whether or not Christians believe or don't believe in the Big Bang Theory. But what is the Big Bang Theory? It'd be helpful to know that ahead of time, right? So aside from being a pretty funny TV show, the Big Bang Theory is this idea that the way the universe was created was from a single point expanding outwards at great speed. In fact, the universe is still expanding now, and that's kind of how this theory came about. But did you know the Big Bang Theory was actually first put forward by a Belgian priest in the 1920s? So maybe it doesn't conflict with the Christian faith as much as you first thought. We're going to give you a couple of seconds to have a think about the three perspectives we've just explored. I want you to think, yes, it does conflict with the Big Bang Theory, no it doesn't, or I'm not 100% sure, and tick that on your worksheet. We'll then explain what we think and give you space to write down your thoughts and opinions on that as well. So, young Earth. Those who hold a young Earth perspective would probably struggle to accept the Big Bang Theory. You see, the Big Bang Theory is something that scientists would say takes millions of years, a very long time to happen. That expansion and creation of different elements takes a long period of time. That doesn't fit with a young Earth view that the creation process took God 6 days and then he had 1 day for rest, like it's written about in Genesis chapter 1. So probably a no for this.
So, old Earth creationists. For the most part, yes, they would agree. But that does depend on how literally they take some of the wording in that passage in Genesis. For example, God saying, "Let there be light," and it coming from nothing could perhaps indicate that there was a Big Bang. Genesis very clearly states that there was a clear starting point to the universe, as does the Big Bang Theory. The idea that the universe had a point of once not existing to all of a sudden it existing out of nothing appears in both the creation story and the Big Bang.
Theistic evolution views Genesis as poetry, which means it can really easily accept any scientific theory put forward. The main point is that God created a wonderful creation, and he could have done that by setting off the Big Bang Theory and setting things in motion. So they'd have no problem accepting the Big Bang Theory as an explanation of the creation of the universe. Okay, I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind tour explaining why different people believe different things, and in fact there's whole books written on this topic, and if you're interested, why not go check some out. But I hope in summary it was clear to you that some Christians believe that the Big Bang theory fits really nicely with their understanding of creation, and others maybe struggle to reconcile it a bit more. Specifically, young Earth creationists would probably struggle to reconcile the Big Bang theory with their beliefs around creation, yet old Earth creationists and those who believe in theistic evolution would have no problem because their views line up pretty well.
So for a cake, there are lots of different ingredients that's been put into it, and you can look at it in one of two different ways. Firstly, maybe you absolutely love baking. This might be how you look at a cake. You might try and work out what flavours there are in there, how they work together. You might look at the colour to determine baking time. Basically, you want to get to the heart of what the recipe is and how the baker made it. So the opposite of that, you might see a cake just like this one, and you might start to ask why they've made a cake in a shape of a world. Maybe it's for a science project, or maybe they've made it for a friend. You might ask who made a cake like this, but most of all and most importantly, you will just enjoy eating the cake. So you can see a cake in both of these different ways, and they don't necessarily disagree with each other. However, they give different perspectives. The point being, when we think about faith and science, they give us two different perspectives on the same things. On the outside, it might look like two different opinions, but actually, they're both looking at the same thing.
I think the layered approach is such a helpful way of understanding how science and faith interact together. It's worth remembering that science doesn't give us reasons why things happen. It explains and observes what does happen and maybe explains some of the cause and effect. So what about evolution? I'm sure that was maybe another thing that you wrote down on your list of areas in science that might conflict with the Christian faith. Well, you're right, it could potentially cause some conflict. But again, we want you to have a think. From what you know about young Earth, old Earth and theistic evolution opinions, do you think there is a conflict, there isn't a conflict, or maybe you're not sure? And as we explain actually what evolution might look like in practice and unpick that as a scientific theory, will also help you understand what different Christians might believe about it. And feel free to make notes as we go along. Put simply, evolution literally means change over time. And did you know there's actually two kind of types of evolution? First of all, we're going to explore microevolution. So microevolution is all about small changes that actually we can observe over time. For example, a study that's often used to explain what microevolution looks like is one that includes some birds and some beetles. So imagine this, set the scene. There's a woodland area with lots of trees with lots of different types of bark on it. And you've got this big population of bugs. And this specific type of bug comes in two different colours. You can get some brown ones and you can get some green ones. They're the same species of bug. They just have a different coloured shell. So these bugs are living their lives, they're chilling around, wandering around on these tree branches in this wood. At the same time, we've also got a bunch of birds. And guess what? Birds really like to eat these beetles. They're super tasty. So of course they swoop in and they eat the bugs. The thing is, on a brown branch, the brown bugs kind of disappear. They're really difficult to see. The green bugs, however, are very obvious. So of course, the birds love these green bugs. They're easy to spot and they can just dive in, have a snack and fly off. So fast forward a little bit, future in time, and these brown bugs are still chilling, having brown bug babies and loving life. There's actually fewer green bugs because some of them have been eaten, and so there's fewer of them to have green bug babies. And There's still birds coming in, swooping in, eating these bugs. And of course, they still prefer the green ones. They're still easier to spot, even if there are a few fewer of them. So fast forward again, and there's basically no green bugs left because they got eaten and they couldn't find someone to have a baby with who would have a green bug baby. And the brown bugs, well, they're loving life. They're still having brown bug babies and they're doing pretty well. So over time, this species, which had green and brown elements to it, different coloured shells, well, it's now pretty much just a brown bug. Other examples of this that you might see in practice are different dog breeds or cat breeds, where certain aspects of them might be bred through, particularly looking at maybe the size of their snout or the type of tail they have, or particular colour patterns that owners really prefer. They're bred through so that that is a more obvious feature. It's something we can see in practice. And actually it's something that Christians, regardless of the views they hold around creation, actually can accept. It's something they can see. What's really important to remember is in that micro evolution, there's no observation of a species change. You don't have a dog suddenly becoming an alligator. You don't have a bug suddenly becoming a butterfly. They are the same species throughout this process. So yes, young Earth, old Earth, and theistic evolution would have no problems at all accepting this version of evolution.
So, macroevolution. The definition of macroevolution is basically microevolution plus 3.8 billion years. Now, it's kind of a clue in the name because micro is small, on a small scale, and macro is on a much larger scale. So, for example, taking the theory of humans coming from apes. No one has ever seen that actually happen. No one has observed it. It's kind of the obvious thing because seeing an ape evolve into a human would take a very long time. And it would be impossible to measure in humanity, let alone a simple person's lifetime. So, however, the people that agree with Darwin's theory confidently say that evolution is a proven fact. And the reason they say that is because they've studied and looked really closely at thousands of different papers that are out there right now, talking about microevolution. The mistake that's made here is that the assumption of microevolution being such an overwhelmingly proven fact, they also think that macroevolution should be the same. For Christians who agree with theistic evolution are basically saying that Adam and Eve are just simply two people who were in the world that represented humankind and that they evolved over time. So throughout the Bible, it's mentioned quite a lot about God creating humans in his image. And for this particular viewpoint in theistic evolution, they would say that that's just a metaphorical term, and that actually it's known as Imago Dei. And basically Imago Dei, in other words, is being made in God's image. But as I just said, theistic evolution, people that agree with that would say that that's just an attitude that maybe humans should have, that Christians should have. So macroevolution is held in extremely high regard, only there's a couple of things that Christians find it actually quite hard to come to terms with. So, for example, the very first thing that what we've just been talking about, that Imago Dei, being made in God's image, and that is something so special and amazing because God loves his people and he wants amazing things for their lives. So those that agree with macroevolution are basically saying that humans are just like animals, but actually that completely contradicts what Imago Dei means and what it means for our lives. So, for young and old Earth creationists, they believe that God is like a watchmaker. That he has designed something so special and unique and put all these different bits and pieces to make humanity, which is something truly incredible. But actually, the most important thing that overall all Christians would return back to Genesis 1. the whole God as creator, that God created the whole universe that we live in. No matter how he did it, that is what's at the forefront of our faith.
So that's it. We hope some of what we've shared in this lesson will be helpful in your understanding of different Christian perspectives in regards specifically to creation and science in general. In a second, we're going to share a quote. And this quote for me is a great summary of what many Christian scientists might think. The fact that their job, the science that they do, doesn't necessarily conflict with the faith that they have, but instead they build one another up.
What is the ultimate solution to the origin of the universe? The answers provided by astronomers are disconcerting and remarkable. Most remarkable of all is the fact that in science, as in the Bible, the world begins with an act of creation.
Hope you've enjoyed this whirlwind of a journey that we've gone on today. As we said at the beginning, we would have loved to have been with you in your classroom, but we hope you've enjoyed it just as much as what you would have done if we were with you in person. So why not use the opportunity now to get that worksheet that you've been working on throughout this session and think about where your opinions lie. What's your viewpoints on science and faith? Have we maybe changed your opinion? Has your opinion stayed the same? Whatever that is, write it down, write down your thoughts, talk to your friends around you about what that means to you. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye.